Gary and Mary Ruth, we've been working on this story for a long time, and we'll tell you right up front that it's going to be hard to swallow at first.
A mystery in the night sky. What some say are drones, lots of them, but no one seems to know from where or why.
Today marks 60 years since Betty and Barney Hill, a New Hampshire couple, were allegedly abducted by aliens.
The Hills encounter becomes the first widely publicized credible report of alien abduction in history.
Betty's best dress was torn in several locations. The top of the zipper, the lining was torn from waist to hemline. The hem was torn down on one side. Barney's best dress shoes were so deeply scraped that he had to purchase new shoes.
Don't go away. Kathleen Marden is next.
Welcome.
We ain't afraid of no ghosts.
This is your #1 podcast for ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties. Bringing you everything you need to know about things that go bump in the night and interviewing the personalities behind them. Make sure your doors and windows are locked. Now, here are your hosts, your ghost hosts, Scott and Julie.
Hello and welcome to the Paranormal Project. My name is Scott Allen. I am here with my co-host Julie Finn, and we are chatting today with Kathleen Marden. Kathleen, thank you so much for being with us today and joining us on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Really, truly is a pleasure to meet with you. You have the unique experience as being the niece to Barney and Betty Hill. And I was hoping maybe you could chat with us a little bit about that and talk about the experience that you remember, and then bring us forward a little bit and talk a little bit about what you're doing.
Be happy to.
Thank you.
I was 13 years old when my aunt and uncle, Betty and Barney Hill, took a short vacation to Niagara Falls, and it was in September 1961. When they were returning home through Montreal, they intended to spend the night there. They'd already spent a couple of nights before that. And then they decided just to drive home. So as they went into upstate New Hampshire, it was about probably 11 o'clock at night, they spotted a new star in the sky that grew larger and larger. And to make a long story short, this object finally surged ahead, stopped over the highway, only 200 feet above their car. And they had to stop the car so they wouldn't drive directly underneath part of it. Barney jumped out of the car with his binoculars and looked up at it. He was a confirmed skeptic. Betty had really no interest in the topic. She had heard about it from my mother one time, as far as I know. But they had this experience. Barney, when he stepped out of the car, stepped back, and the craft moved to an adjacent field. Now it was hovering about 50 feet above him and 100 feet in the distance. He saw what he always remembered as figures that were somehow not human. Looking back at him, they were wearing black shiny uniforms. He became terribly frightened because he felt that he was going to be abducted or captured. And so he went running back to the car to tell Betty that they had to get out of there. As he was entering the car, he saw the craft coming back in his direction. Within moments, he and Betty heard a series of code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of the car. The car vibrated. A tingling sensation passed through their bodies. The next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the highway. They had very little memory of what happened in the interim. They remembered finding themselves in a new location on a dirt road with tall trees all around. They remembered a roadblock. They remembered a fiery orb that seemed to be sitting on the ground that was lighting up part of the area red. And the second series of buzzing sounds returned them to full consciousness. They drove on home looking for a restaurant that might be open or a police officer. They didn't find anything. When they arrived home, it was about 5 o'clock in the morning. I have the watch that Betty was wearing. Their watches were both broken when they arrived home, but Betty didn't realize it. She set her watch for 5:15, the time that she noticed that that's what time it was, not what the time that the watch said. There was also evidence. Betty's best dress was torn in several locations. The top of the zipper, the lining was torn from waist to hemline. The hem was torn down on one side. Barney's best dress shoes were so deeply scraped that he had to purchase new shoes. He was deeply troubled by this. There was a magnetic field around the trunk of their vehicle and new shiny spots that hadn't been there the day before. It was in the location where they heard these buzzing sounds striking. And just so many mysteries. And when I'm 13 years old again, I'm home from school. My mother has now called a neighbor of ours who was a physicist to ask him what Betty and Barney should do. The craft had come so close to them, they were afraid that they'd been contaminated. They'd taken long showers to decontaminate. They had left their clothing and everything else outside. And it was the physicist who told them that if they had a compass, they should take it out to the car to see how the needle reacts. Well, you know, it's going to react around the battery. But
Right.
no, this was around the trunk of the car where they found the magnetic field. So there was so much. Finally, Barney became so traumatized by all this that he was admitted to the hospital with bleeding ulcers and high blood pressure, symptoms that just wouldn't recede with traditional medical treatment. And so he was referred to Dr. Benjamin Simon in Boston. Dr. Simon was a renowned psychiatrist, and he had worked very successfully with veterans returning home from World War II. The veterans who had shell shock or conversion hysteria, which is Barney had conversion hysteria, where he had physiological problems that was psychologically induced. And through using deep trance hypnosis, he treated Barney and was very successful in that treatment.
Wow.
Now, with Betty, she went along and she asked to have hypnosis too. She wasn't that traumatized, although she did have some working through to do. And so she had separate hypnosis from Barney. Dr. Simon reinstated amnesia at the end of each session. And this gave me the opportunity to do a comparative analysis of their statements as part of my research. As it stands today, I have been doing research on this case and investigation for 31 years. And a lot of new evidence has come forward. The dress has been tested in laboratories at least 8 times now, with unusual findings on that dress. I've written about this in my updated version of Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, 60th anniversary edition. Also, when Betty was on the craft, she asked the leader where he came from. And he produced sort of this 3-dimensional map that was sort of like looking out a window at stars of different sizes and shapes and colors, I mean. And some of those stars were connected by solid lines, some by dotted lines. There were 2 very large stars in the front, down at the bottom of this map. Dr. Simon told Betty that if she could remember this and it didn't bother her too badly, that she would be able to sketch it. So she did. And it appeared for the first time in a book that was written about their case after it was released to the public as the result of a violation of confidentiality. Now, a brilliant woman from Ohio saw that, and it took her several years, and we had to advance technologically before we were able to get distance data that was accurate. But once she had that accurate distance data, she was able to identify the stars on Betty's map. And what she did in order to do this is she went to the university, she used the astronomical catalog, she hand copied all the distance data and the characteristics of the stars out 54 light years in every direction from our sun. And when she finally had a match and astrophysicists confirmed that her work was accurate, then we found out that Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 were the large stars at the bottom of the map. We also found out that all of the stars on that star map are sun-like, although only 5% of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood out 54 light years are sun-like. And all of the sun-like stars in that volume of space are on Betty's map. Not only that, they're in a plane. So it makes travel easier to move from one star system to another. In fact, one of the astrophysicists said that if we lived on Zeta Reticuli and we were beginning our exploration of our nearby stars, that we would take that exact route. So pretty amazing stuff.
Not just amazing, but I mean, scientific proof, educated people in science. It's just a wonder to think of.
How much of this did they remember coming, when they woke up the next morning or they got home? Were they complete amazement, like what happened to us, or did they have any memories at that point?
And what I just told you before I said they went for hypnosis is all that they remembered. They remembered the roadblock, the dirt road. They looked for that place for years. And after they were hypnotized, then they were able to find that place eventually.
Right.
So there's a tremendous amount of evidence here that I have uncovered. I wrote the book with Stanton T. Friedman, the late Stanton Friedman, who was a nuclear physicist. We worked closely together for 14 years. And I'm college educated. I've attended graduate school. I was a teacher. Initially, I studied psychiatric social work. And then in 1990, I decided to leave my profession, and I devoted the rest of my life to date to studying and researching and investigating not only my aunt and uncle's event, but many, many others. I've worked on 3 major studies on experiencers amounting to more than 5,000 experiencers to date with social scientists, PhD academics. And for 10 years, I was the Mutual UFO Network's Director of Experiencer Research.
Oh, wow. Fascinating. Do you think now, when I say now, I mean in the 2022, are we seeing more people coming forward than before? I would think, at the time that your aunt and uncle went through this, they were probably afraid to tell a lot of people back then.
Oh, they didn't want to tell anybody because they would have been thought of as a couple of kooks. And that was their reason they were willing to make a report with Pease Air Force Base and talk to scientists. But they certainly didn't want that to leak out to the public. They were active in the civil rights movement. My uncle in 1965 was appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights.
Wow.
So, it did have a very big impact on their lives because it was not something they were interested in. They were interested in politics. In fact, in 1965, they were invited to Lyndon Johnson's inauguration.
Really?
And I was too, because they were very active in politics in the state. They were not active in UFOs. That
Right.
was something different. And it was something that happened to them that they did not want to disclose. And today, yes, more and more people are coming forward. They're still apprehensive about going forward with their abduction events. I can tell you in 2011, when I began my work as MUFON's Director of Experiencer Research, we received about 100 reports a month. And this has continued. So a tremendous amount of people, I'm not saying they all had contact. You know, some people have just had paranormal activity. Some have been had sleep paralysis and hypnopompic or hypnagogic hallucinations. Some have some mental illness, but still there is a highly significant percentage of these individuals who have had contact with these non-human entities. Many of them are growing older now. They're in their 50s, 60s, 70s. And so they're not worried about their careers anymore. Many of them have retired. And so they feel that they're safe in coming forward and just talking to somebody who will listen, who will non-judgmentally. You'd be amazed at how people are helped just by being able to talk about this without ridicule.
Yeah, you know, Julie knows this. I was not abducted, but I did have a situation where I was within 50 feet of an aircraft. I don't know what it was. It was 1995. It was in a back roads in Massachusetts. I was driving. It was middle of the afternoon, and this thing came over the highway, and it's shaped like a skateboard. It lit up the highway, went right over the trees, and quiet, silent, nothing. There was a car in front of me. I flashed my lights to try to get them to stop. They kept on going. It was years before I told anyone, because I didn't quite know, what do you tell? You know, what do you say without people thinking you're completely out of your mind? I cannot imagine what your aunt and uncle must have gone through to go through that experience. That's just horrific.
Especially in 1961, where people certainly were not open-minded about anything out of the ordinary, as, you know, just to phrase a word. I just can't imagine it would be so difficult for them to have to deal with that and deal with, as you say, you know, Barney was in politics, and that would have been something absolutely nobody needs to know anything about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was extraordinarily difficult for both of them, and became more difficult when the violation of confidentiality occurred.
Right.
But I do have to say, after it went public, Betty did take a lie detector test and passed it without any evidence of deception. There was a tremendous amount of evidence. Unfortunately, Barney died from massive cerebral hemorrhage at age 46 in 1969.
But he was, I mean, from what I've read, he was an extremely intelligent man. I mean, you know, that's what I've read. I mean, there's no reason to believe that any of this, it just would not be in character for him.
Barney had a genius level IQ.
Yes.
He was very down to earth. He cared very much about his public image.
Right.
And this was so distressing for him.
And there, as Scott said, no reason for them to tell a story. And not only that, the last thing that they would want would be to be associated with UFO abductees, or, you know, those kooks down the road who think that they saw a flying saucer. I mean, that's just the way it was in 1961, the early 60s.
Absolutely. And Betty's and Barney's case was the first scientifically investigated case of close encounter with a UFO and subsequent abduction. So there was nothing to frame the story around.
Kathleen, we have just a few minutes left in our time with you. Do you want to just share a little bit about yourself? I know you've taken this, you know, this is your life now. Are you able to share a little bit about what you're doing and your books and how people can
Yes,
learn more.
I'd love to. I've written 6 books now. You can see them and even purchase autographed copies at Kathleen-Marden.com, Marden. And I continue to write. I continue to do research. I have a support group for experiencers, and I am a hypnosis practitioner. I sort of do that on a very part-time basis. I have traveled around the world speaking on this topic. I'm the International UFO Congress awarded me their Lifetime Achievement Award in 2021. The Mutual UFO Network, earlier than that, awarded me a very nice award too. You might see them in the background. They are behind me. And so I have worked full-time on this topic. I continue to. If you'd like to see where I'm going to be speaking this year, you can see that on my website as well.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Kathleen, I'm just very grateful and appreciative that you came on to the show with us today. We're going to stop and take a quick little commercial break. We'll be back in just a few minutes with Mike Stevens, who is the founder of Granite Sky Services in New Hampshire. So stick around. We'll be back with you in just a few minutes. Our guest today is Mike Stevens, who is the founder of Granite Sky Services. They provide support to all experiencers of extraterrestrial encounters, contact, and abductions. And I've been really looking forward to speaking with you, Mike, because I had my own experience back, almost 30 years ago now. It was 1995. But I'd love to learn more about what you do and how you went on to found Granite Sky Services. You told me earlier that you had your own experience. How old were you when that happened?
About 3.5, 4 years old.
Oh, wow. Now, I don't want to probe. Are you open to chatting about that, or is that something you'd rather not?
No, that's fine. I mean, I personally rather not, but no, I've done it enough. It's open. We can do that.
So tell me about your experience. I mean, 3 to 4 years old is an awfully young age to have to endure something like that.
Yeah. So we were at my grandmother's house in Southampton. There was some type of family function going on. Because by we, I mean like the whole family, aunts, uncles, cousins, everything. It's probably like somebody's birthday or something. And the way my grandmother's house was set up, you would come in through the front door, through a little porch-in area, into the kitchen, into the dining room. And off that dining room, there's like a 3-season porch that overlooked the backyard. I had walked through the dining room, and as soon as I got kind of that area that first, opened out to the backyard, I just had this immense calling to get outside. I don't know how I got outside. I don't remember how I got outside, but when I got outside, I found my cousin standing in the driveway. She's only like 6 months older than I am. And, that's not how we were raised. We were watched like hawks. The chance of one of us getting outside would have been a miracle. Never mind both of us. But anyways, we're both standing there in the driveway. We have no reason to be there, or we don't know why we're there. And the next thing we know, behind my grandmother's lawn, there's a tree line that goes into woods. And in that tree line, in those woods, there was this red glow that started appearing, and all you could see was tree shadows. And it slowly rose up until it broke the tree line. And then once it broke the tree line, we could see this metallic object. And it floated like you kind of like throw a paper airplane. You couldn't sense any type of propulsion. That's why I really used the word floated towards us across the lawn and parked itself next to this big tree my grandmother used to have at the end of her driveway. Our best estimates, looking back, it is probably like 40 feet wide, 20 feet high, kind of classic saucer shape. It had a row of lights around the center of this thing that, not like individual bulbs that flash, but there was a sequence of colors flashing along this thing, but it was more fluid. They were kind of like softer lights, like whites, light blues, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, they started moving faster and changed in colors and intensity to more oranges and reds. And when that happened, almost like when you open your car door at night, the interior light comes on, that sort of thing happened where some sort of light came on in this object on the interior that revealed a row of windows right above that bar light. You could see two humanoid figures, but you couldn't make out any details. All you could see was like just kind of a black shadow standing there, and you had just this intense feeling of being watched. I have a block in my standing memory there, and then the next thing I remember, this craft was at the other end of the driveway, hovering above a telephone pole. It sat there for a minute and then shot off into a dot into the sky in the blink of an eye.
Wow. Do you think in that block that you were taken aboard, or do you think that it was just that was the experience?
No, I've had hypnosis well after the fact, just because, and it would appear, yeah, I know people are wishy-washy on hypnosis, but I just want to clarify this part is under hypnosis. It would appear that we're taken aboard. Didn't really, even in that hypnotic memory, I couldn't really remember a whole lot, but I could sense things around me. I didn't have like a lot of visual memories with it. But I ended up snapping myself out of the regression because to me, the whole, a lot of what was going on at the moment was distraction for me at the time, because they had my cousin on board as well. And that's kind of when I like snapped out of it. And
yeah, I was just going to ask you that. So your cousin experienced a similar, the similar experience as you.
Yeah, she doesn't. We ended up talking about it many years later because we grew up with this kind of nonchalant, conversation about it. Like, hey, remember the UFO we saw? And then so once I really started getting involved with this and decided I was going to do something with it, I gave her a phone call and, said, hey, what do you remember? And then I told her what I remembered. And she didn't remember anything I remembered. She actually brought in a new memory. She's like, we're at my grandmother's house again, looking across the neighbor's yard, which is basically a huge backyard, basically a field. And she's like, no, don't you remember when the light came in and all that? And as soon as she said it, I remembered it. But I remember that happening when we were much older. So like we wouldn't have had the conversation about that as children, before that time frame. And in my memory, that's not the way the timeline goes. But yeah, so that's what she thought we were always talking about. She somehow blocked out this first encounter. But after that, she kind of developed more psychic skills. She had memories of seeing the Statue of Liberty from above before she'd ever been in a plane.
Wow.
He was talking to the woman in my grandmother's house with the bad back, which would have been my great-grandmother, who she had never met. And, so all this stuff started happening to both of us in different directions because of the same incident.
So, Mike, I have a question for you, and I'm just wondering, were any adults involved in this encounter the first time? I mean, I'm just thinking, like you said, in the day, little kids were watched like hawks. I'm just wondering if an adult even was made aware that they should go look for you.
No, as far as I know, there's never been, like any family stories of the time we ran off or anything like that. When I did the hypnosis for it, I do, like I said, I don't remember how I got outside of the house, but I do have like a photographic memory of my grandmother's kitchen at the moment, like that I can see. And it almost seems like time was frozen for a minute.
Right. Is it that from what I've been reading, glitches in time or frozen time is very common in abductees' memory or what's happened in
Yeah,
an abduction.
time and yeah, missing time is a really big thing because, like I said, sometimes people don't even realize they've had experiences. They just, they show up somewhere 2 hours late. And you're like, oh, how did that happen? He, and
Right.
you just play it off. It always kind of takes that trigger item or experience to be like, oh wait, this is what's been going on.
How do you manage that as a 3 or 4-year-old child, going through an experience like this? Do you think you
Well,
had any kind of sense of it at the time, or?
it wasn't probably till about school age that I, quickly became aware. You don't talk about this. This is not when it first happens, you don't know, you're that young. You just think this is part of life. You think everybody's gone through it.
Right. Right.
That makes sense, especially a young child like that. Now, you had said that your cousin has some psychic abilities, possibly because of this. Have you experienced any psychic ability?
I have. I generally try not to use it. The dealing with the encounters and stuff is enough. I don't need to see spirits and stuff. But yeah, no, it happens more regularly than I'd like to admit. I can't tell the future or, tell you that it was your grandmother or anything like that. But I do visually see a lot of stuff.
See things. Do you find that, in the work that you do with Granite Sky, that these encounters are similar? Or do you think these entities, whoever they are coming from different places and different? Because I'll tell you about my situation in a bit, and it's different than yours. Where do you think these people are coming from? Are they all similar experiences, or are they sort of? Do you think they're all different?
There's a lot of commonalities, but the problem with that is, the Betty and Barney Hill case really became the standout case. And after that case, they kind of made a set of standards about how an abduction works. And they said you either fit into that or you don't. So if you didn't fit in, it wasn't an abduction. But then if you did fit into it, they said, well, yeah, you just copied everything they said. So.
Right.
And Betty and Barney Hill, meaning the couple, that was what, 1961? Is that what we said, Julie?
Yes, it was 1961 in New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire, and they were abducted, and they're kind of, like you say, they're the standard. But for those of those listening that don't know who Betty and Barney Hill are, but
so there's commonalities like that, and then sometimes that's why I love doing group meetings, because there's stuff that's in none of the literature, none of any of popular culture. Somebody will come in and say, this is my experience, this happened, have you heard about it? And you'd be like, kind of scrolling through your memory and be like, I have it. And then somebody from across the room will shoot their hand up and be like, I've never heard anybody say that before. That is exactly it. Then they'll tell their story. So
Sure.
it's a lot bigger than what we call ufology wants to actually look at.
Right. As we were saying earlier, it sounds like what you do at Granite Sky Services is a lot like a support group.
Yeah, very much so. I love the group meetings just because then they don't just get my opinion, they get cross opinion. And we do our groups, we do it not with just people who've had negative or traumatic experiences. We do it with people who have had, positive experiences, and we get that mix, but everybody's there for the same reason, just try to get on terms with it in their whole life. A lot of what we do is not trying to explain or figure this stuff out. Our motto is people, not prove. We're not trying to, name the race that abducted you or prove it in a court of law. We're really trying to get you to be able to get through the day and to get through the next night. And from there we'll start again. The human side of this is a much bigger problem than the extraterrestrial side of it sometimes. And so that's really what we do. We're protecting other humans, not necessarily ufologists.
Absolutely. So
it's support for the people that have gone through it. It's support for the people that have gone through it. What would you consider a positive experience?
What I was just going to ask. Exactly. Yeah. I'm very curious as to what people would convey as a positive experience.
Um, so they recently did a study. Ray Hernandez, I don't know if you're familiar with him, and his free organization. They did a massive study of experiences of abductees and the like, and it turns out that 84% of people who have had what we'd call negative experiences would still rather have gone through the experience than not. And so that's with some of the traumatic stuff. But the other side is people have where they see a more what you'd call spirit guides or guardian angels. They've had experiences like that where they don't have any abduction, like medical test stuff. They just have like this other, worldly guide being their friend and helping them through life. So that would be more of a positive.
Do you think there's a relationship between spirit guides and guardian angels and the UFO experience? Because when I think of guardian angels and that, I think of them being sort of connected to us on a celestial way, not necessarily a UFO type of experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole question is still out there. We call them extraterrestrials out of space. Are they interdimensional? There's that whole debate. But I think these are all just labels we put on them.
Right.
I think it's all at its basic level consciousness, but other than that, it's just frequency. It's just kind of how you can walk into a room and know there's been a fight, even if you didn't hear the fight. It's
right.
that type of in-depth understanding.
I did not have an experience that was bad. I wouldn't call it positive or negative, to be honest with you. It was more of an experience. Certainly wasn't an abduction. I remember it was 1995, just before Mother's Day. I was driving on Route 140 I was actually in the town of Winchendon heading to Gardner. So it was Route 140 south. And there was one car in front of me, nobody behind me. And I had the window down. And there was this craft of some sort. It was not a saucer type vehicle. It looked more like a skateboard. It was sort of longer. From what I remember, the bottom was this metallic-y metal, brushed metal or something. It seemed flat, like the sole of a shoe. It just seemed flat, metal, and there was this amber light that went all the way around. And I vaguely remember it coming over the trees. And it was low. I mean, it was not high up. I mean, it may have been 10 feet above. I mean, it was that low to the tree line. Came right across the highway. Sort of, I remember the highway lit up with amber light as it went across, and it just glided. And it really did glide. When you said that earlier about no propulsion, there was no sound, there was no motors, there was no engines. It just almost like a balloon just kind of floated across the highway and just kept on going. And I was flashing my lights. I wanted the car in front of me to stop. I kept flashing my lights. Did you see that? I mean, we didn't have cell phones back then. Even if I did, I wouldn't have known their number to call them. But I tried to get them to pull over, and they just kept on going. And that's all it was. It wasn't a plane. I don't know what it was. I don't know where it went from that point. I checked newspapers. There was never any reports of it or anybody else seeing it. And I only told someone, I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my family for whatever reason. I just didn't. And there was a few years later, there was a woman that I knew. She was a teacher. She was a school teacher. And she told me that she had been going to school one morning to work, and she had had a sighting not far from where I had mine. And when she told me that, I felt free and open to be able to share with her what I had experienced. And that was the first time I'd ever told anyone, and that was years later. But the experiences were quite different in terms of the type of craft, what it looked like. Hers was just sort of hovering there wherever she was, and mine was on a mission. It was moving. It never stopped, didn't pay attention to me. And the person in front of me just kept on going. I had had an experience with a psychic years later, and I asked her if she could, there was a way to kind of get a sense of this, and there wasn't any. I've never been able to really get any kind of validation about anything that had happened. But yeah, it was just a very strange, kind of surreal experience, and I don't know what it was. But it wasn't a plane or a balloon, because
Yeah.
it was huge. It had to be the size of at least 2 to 3 buses. I mean, it was that long. And it just drifted, and then it was gone, right over hidden by the trees.
Yeah, and I think the word you used was the perfect word to describe it. It's such a surreal, moment. You're just kind of trapped in it. But even though her description was different, this is why I tell people it's so important to report your sightings. I like the National UFO Reporting Center personally myself, as opposed to MUFON. But as long as they get reported somewhere, it doesn't matter. But sometimes, if you might just have a simple sighting, but it will validate and cross, check with somebody else who's had an abduction, and that helps them dramatically knowing somebody else saw this thing. It helps them to know, like, all right, this is real. I need to process it. They don't have to go through this whole point of worrying about if they're crazy or not.
Right. And I know that's what it was for me. I don't even know that I consciously thought people are going to think I'm nuts. it was so long ago, but I don't know if there was fear involved of I just shut it down. I think, I remembered it. I didn't forget it, but I shut it down, and I never talked about it until that moment. It was a very strange experience, and I can't imagine how people feel that were abducted. In your experience, do people tend to remember it as it happened, or do they usually only remember during hypnotherapy or hypnosis?
Everybody's different. I tend to remember a lot of beginnings and endings, not necessarily middles. Will tap in. Some people have better recall from a middle to an end, or a beginning to a middle, or just a middle. It ranges, and then it depends on when people had their experiences. I've talked to people who have seen, it's all kind of age appropriate what you have for references in your mind, because you don't really know what you're seeing, who have seen the Jolly Green Giant in their bedroom, who have seen Humpty Dumpty in their bedroom, but they were 5 when they had the experience.
Right.
So your mind tries to put something there so it can try to rationalize you, but it makes it really hard. So I don't try to prove or disprove anything. That this is this person's experience, and I'm going to honor it.
I was just going to say you're honoring the experience, and I think that's good too, because how do we know? How can you prove it anyway? You know what I mean? It happened. They had an experience that they can't explain, and they need support for that. Do you think that, especially in cases where there have been abductions, do you feel, or have you discovered that these things happen more than once to the same people? Are they being brought back for a purpose, or is it usually a one and done kind of thing?
I think for the most part, it's usually more of a cradle to grave situation. It's not on accident. It's on purpose. It's for a mission. I couldn't tell you what that mission is, but it seems very much like checkups, check-ins, like you would go to the doctor for or something. They're definitely, most experiencers I know, and even the ones who have only had, say, the one experience, it's only the one experience they know, or remember or think of. And because I know a lot of, and then there's the offshoot. I know a lot of experienced have problem getting involved with somebody else because it doesn't stop following you or your life just because you're, dating suddenly, and now you have to explain to, a potential significant other why there was just a UFO out in the backyard that, and you're like, yeah, it happens all the time. So it compounds life on so many levels. you're not just an experiencer when it's happening or when you're being abducted. You are an experiencer for the rest of your life, every moment of your life.
That
you have to
leads me to a question, Mike, which is if you are an experiencer through life and you do wind up marrying and having a family, would this be generational? Would these, abductors be interested in your children?
It would seem to be. So before I really talked about any of this stuff, I grew up in a family that was fine to talk about ghosts and the paranormal and all that stuff, but just nobody talked about aliens. And, so they kind of let me and my cousin's little snide conversation of, oh, remember the time we see the UFO go, but never really get into it or ask. I thought it was just silly kid stuff. So then I got involved and helped get a historical marker put up here in New Hampshire for Betty and Barney Hill. And so when the news of that kind of traveled through the family, that's when all this history from the families came out. My great uncle got kicked out of a private school in the mid 60s for claiming he was abducted.
Really?
Everybody in my family's basically seen a UFO.
Wow.
And it's following my mother's side at least. But nobody talked about it. So it was, again, one of those things. Once you put it there was a reason to talk about it, everybody kind of was like, oh, we can talk about this. And, and that was kind of one of the reasons too. It's I don't have to be a trained counselor or this or that. You have to give people the opportunity and the platform to say something.
Right.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, that's very interesting. And it must have been a real eye opener for your family when people did start talking about their experiences and have found that, as a family unit, they've had a number of experiences.
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, they kind of want to brush it off. Not so much in the fact that they don't believe in it. I just think it makes them uncomfortable. It's not really affecting their day-to-day life at the moment, and they don't want it to.
Completely understandable. We all want to be put within that quote normal, when we're thinking about people, and we all want to be thought that, we're just regular normal people. And we don't want to move out of that, or people think that we're not that. So yeah, I can completely understand that.
Is there a sense of fear? When will it happen again type of thing?
If you look at a lot of different cases and stuff, it definitely seems to be more heavy through childhood, kind of slows down a little bit through puberty, kind of ramps it back up, around your mid-20s. And there's cycles where of heavy activity and low activity, it seems. There's never a standard where they couldn't show up at any given moment, which is a big reason a lot of experiencers have PTSD, anxiety, depression, because it's really hard to know that something that isn't human, that you cannot control at any moment, can zap you out of this reality, do whatever to you, and maybe put you back.
Right.
Maybe. And what is the fear that they won't? It's
Exactly.
absolutely
Sure.
horrifying.
Sure. Mike, I just have a question for you, and I'm just wondering, you were able to describe at a young, when you first saw the ship, and you were very descriptive. In your experiences after that, do you think, or do you remember, was it the same ship? Did it look the same?
A lot of the other memories, I haven't really seen the ship. It's been more them in the room or a ball of light and then something happens and that sort of thing. I haven't seen the same type of ship, but I do believe, so there was another incident. We ended up living in the house next to my grandmother years after that experience. And I was visited quite a bit while we lived there. and it didn't seem random in the fact of it's not like I petted one dog once and then the same day a different dog came and I petted it. They seem to be the same entities over and over and over again.
Oh,
like
wow.
there was a familiarity with them.
Right.
And, nobody knows what they are, who they are, what their lifespan is, but I kind of think back to the generational question that it's probably the same group, that follows not just you your whole life, but your family as well.
Right. I see. Right. Wow.
You have a YouTube channel. Is it Exeter Terrestrial? Is that right?
Yeah, that was a public access show we did for a little bit, and then the pandemic hit, and we just never got back to it as of this point. But yeah, we were basically just interviewing people who are into, anything strange, UFOs, Bigfoot, paranormal. And I said, anybody's interested in anything strange, and I shouldn't have said it that way, because a lot of what seems strange to a lot of people is normal to a lot of us. And so by having these people on, that was trying to, conversation.
Let's say out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
Right.
We know a lot of people that are out of the ordinary, Mike.
Mike, you're coming on so this show is going to air after the Paracon, but I know in a couple of weeks you're going to be coming to Massachusetts to speak at the USS Salem Paracon that's going on. What is this the type of talk that you'll be giving about your experiences, or what are you going to be sharing?
No, it's always hard sometimes when you go to a Paracon as a UFO guy, and I think I'm the only UFO guy on the schedule. So sometimes you have to play to your audience a little bit. So I don't know if that would fly or if that's what the audience wants to hear. So what I'm actually going to talk about is crossover experiences, things we get from in the UFO field, but also happen in the paranormal field that seem to cross over the same exact events, but we look at them very different from each field.
Right.
What is it? Can you explain that? I'm just curious. That sounds interesting to me.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, love or hate them, orbs. We're not talking about bug dust or still photos.
Right.
We're talking about like little self-glowing balls of light. We get them in the UFO community. You guys get them in a paranormal investigation.
Right.
Physicality. We see ghosts walk through walls, and we go, "Oh, well, that's because the house has changed from when this person was alive."
Right.
Extraterrestrials, many reports, the physicality is there. They come through walls. They seem to have the extra one where they can pull other physical material through walls as well. Time. We believe we can see a spirit reenacting a battle from the Civil War, even though it's 2022. With the abduction, you have the missing time and stuff, what we talked about earlier, like all these concepts that we think are rules. Both fields of study have the same type of where physics and time don't exist. So I don't want to give away the whole lecture, but things like that. Where are the parallels? And are we talking about something different, or are we just looking at something from a different view? And
yeah, and we've talked about this on this show before, and we're going to have Willie and Lynn on. Do you know? Well, you know them, right? Willie.
Oh yeah, Willie and Lynn.
Yeah. Right, obviously. So they're coming on the show, and we were with them one night in New Hampshire at the James House.
Yes.
And I think we had some kind of a time slip glitch. I don't know what it was, but we were there. And have you ever been there before? Have you been to that location?
I haven't. I'm very well aware of it. I've just never actually been there myself.
It's a hollow out building. I mean, there's nothing. You can stand in the attic and talk to someone in the basement, and they'll hear you. I mean, it's that open. And as we spiked to 4.0 on the millimeter, we started hearing heavy boots, footsteps marching across the floor, heavy pieces of furniture as if they were being dragged across the floor. and it was loud. And we called to Willie and Lynn, who were sitting on the first floor, and I yelled to them, Willie, Lynn, nothing. They never responded. When everything quieted down, we went downstairs. He was sitting in the little area there when you come in. He said he hadn't moved, and not only that, but he hadn't been dragging anything across the floor. He never heard us calling for him, and he never heard the footsteps. So the question is, what happened? Where were we? Where was he? You know, what was actually going on? Was it a time slip, a glitch? I don't know.
What was it? And yeah, it's very strange. Our voices changed. We're lucky enough to have it recorded. And we keep going over and over that, trying to figure out exactly where we were, what happened at that point. It was just the strangest thing. So time is just so odd, you know, working with what we do in the paranormal, and then with what you do, Mike, you know, like you say, kind of parallel worlds when we're talking about time.
And, you know, just philosophically, if there's a crack in that time space thing, whatever it is that where these beings that visit us slip through? You know, is that a direct route? Is that a shortcut rather than traveling, you know, gazillions of miles across the universes to get here? It's philosophical, and I don't know that we'll ever know who these beings are or where they come from, but it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, the only answer I give people on that is, you know, is the old cliche is like, well, we'll know when we're supposed to know if we're supposed to know.
Yeah.
So
And when you
true.
find out,
Yes.
you know, what's on the other side, it's because you're there.
You're most likely there. Right.
Hang on. Your website is it granitesky.org?
Yeah, granitesky.org.
If anybody is having an experience and they want to reach out to you, they can reach out to you through Granite Sky. And also, well, no, I was going to say come down and visit Mike on the Paracon, but this will be already broadcast by that point on the Paracon. So, you know, certainly if they're having an experience and want to reach out to you. Mike, is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Just to the general audience, whether you believe or don't believe, let somebody say their piece. Let them get it off their chest. You know, you don't have to judge. You don't have to prove them right. You don't have to prove them wrong. Just be a decent human. I think we'll all get a lot farther that way.
I think you're 100% right. And, you know, if somebody says my feelings are hurt, let them have that feeling. Let them have that moment. Whether they're right, wrong for feeling that way is irrelevant. They had an experience, and they own that. That's their experience. Mike, I really appreciate you coming on the show.
So thank you for having me. Thank you.
You have been listening to The Paranormal Project with Scott Allen and Julie Finn. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. While you're there, leave us a rating and review so others can find out about the show. Stay haunted and go out there and explore the paranormal.